Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of Winston's Weekly, covering all things property. I'm Manny Anton, your host for today's property chat. Winston, as always, welcome back.
Thank you, it's good to be here.
All right, so let's get into it. As usual, we usually start with what's going on in the US, so let's go there first. There have been some, quite a few pieces of data out in the last couple of weeks, and that's impacted bonds over there. So we've seen yields actually start to slide a little bit off the back of those data points. The data points being things like, I think we had US payrolls out. We also had the CPI number out this week. We had retail sales out this week in the US. All of those numbers were a little bit probably softer, which the market liked. And in fact, equity markets over there have all hit new, all-time highs. Every index, I think, the Dow, the S&P, and the Nasdaq, all testing new highs off the back of that. So basically, the interest rate sensitive sectors have done very well, and yields have gone down. From a property perspective, what are your thoughts?
Well, the interest rate sensitive sectors and the REITs have done particularly well. Yesterday, the REIT sector was up around 4%. It was primarily the leaders that led that. Stocks like Goodman Group, Charter Hall, Dexus, all sort of recovering from some lows. Apart from Goodman's, it's been very strong over the last couple of weeks. And it is an issue of expectations that rate cuts are coming. Even though at this stage the US is now sort of expecting a rate cut in September. So it's still some time away. And there's still a number of data points that the Fed will need to keep an eye on over that time frame. But for example, the CPI came in pretty well in line with expectations. It was an issue that I think the market sort of took positively on the basis that it wasn't going in the wrong direction. So it took heart from that.
Okay. Well, you mentioned Goodman Group and a couple of the Australian names there. So let's turn to the domestic markets. Also a fair bit of news out the last couple of weeks. So we had the RBA policy decision out last week. The commentary from the RBA governor there flagged that she made it pretty clear that they are watching inflation very closely. It's clearly they're still not comfortable, and it clearly remains pretty sticky. This week we also had the federal budget. So the significant pieces of news, impacts to the property sector from those two pieces of news domestically.
Well, interestingly, the budget was framed around the expectation by the government, by Treasury, that inflation would fall within the Reserve Bank's range of 2 to 3% by the end of the year. The market really didn't react one way or the other after the budget in terms of that expectation, because it is a big call, and they've released some policies which will sort of help, but it's still very much it's in the hands of other people, other entities to determine what happens with inflation. The services sector is still a bit of an issue in terms of things like cost of insurance, rates, power prices, even though people are going to get $300 over the course of the year back from the government. So that there are still some question marks about that. And I think that's why the market didn't react one way or the other in terms of what the government is saying, what Treasury is saying, as opposed to what the RBA is saying, which are actually at odds, because the RBA is effectively saying that we won't get back into that 2 to 3% range until 2025, probably mid-year towards the end of 2025. So it's going to be interesting to see how this pans out.
Yep, absolutely. Oh, okay, and sort of sticking with the domestic. I noticed Peter Dutton came out last night and gave his response to the budget. One of the issues he attacked was housing, affordability, and one of the things he talked about, or his idea as to how to take some heat out of that market was to cut immigration. What do you think about that?
Well, look, immigration, the growth of people coming in has to be accommodated in terms of being able to house them somewhere. So it does make sense in terms of saying if we cut back on immigration, that won't put as much pressure on the need. But at the end of the day, the Labor government is effectively promising 1.2 million homes over the next couple of years, and that's a tall order to deliver. I think, and I think a lot of people also, in terms of jobs, in an environment where the unemployment rate is likely to rise, the more people we bring in, the less jobs Australians have in terms of filling those positions.
All right. I mean, do you think, just one before we move on to it, do you think the answer lies more in correcting supply or adding supply versus cutting demand? Because it's a bit of a balance, right? Like you can approach it by saying, I'm gonna try to put a cap on demand for housing to bring that tension out of the market, or you can go the other way and say, I'm going to supply the market and push prices down that way. Which one do you think?
Well, the issue with supply is you have to have the labour, you have to have the material, you have to have the growth of applications being approved by the various councils. So there's a lot of sort of gates on the way through to getting that done. The other way around, by reducing the inflow of people, is probably the easiest way in terms of trying to reduce that demand.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll see. We'll see who's right at some point. But okay, so let's move forward to next week. Is there anything that you've sort of focused on for next week? Anything from a property perspective we need to be aware of? Any announcements or anything of that nature?
No, not specifically. There have been a couple of transactions being announced in the office market that again indicate the softness of the market itself. And we may see some more transactions being announced in terms of buyers and sellers coming together. But apart from that, there's nothing really. There's no announcements. There's no dividends or distributions being announced. We'll have to wait until next month for the end of year data to come out in terms of the REITs. So it's just a wait and see attitude at this stage.
Okay. Understood. All right. Well, Winston, thank you for your time and your insights today, as always.
It's a pleasure.
And we will be back with another edition of Winston's Weekly next Friday. Until then, have a great day and a great weekend.